Good afternoon and most welcome to episode 1003 of the Heidegger series. Let me just find a good spot to stand on here. This lecture I'm specifically happy on having because it's a subject that's been bugging me or interesting me for, I would say, at least 3 decades, and I can finally come to a solution. So it's not only a great relief, but I would say it's also incredibly interesting. And I think I did this discovery early this morning when I was sitting and writing. I was writing incredibly intense, and this happens. You become so intense that you forget your positioning in space, and that will happen because you need to do your things as well. You cannot go so far when thinking about space that you lose what you are doing, and that's a cumbersome problema. But understanding that sometimes you will forget and that it was necessary in pretense because you need to do your things as well. So the process of learning to do two things at the same time, taking in space at the same time as you're focusing on doing your things, will run into problems at some times. That is absolutely natural. You should never ever blame yourself for forgetting space and the things around you, and it will affect the result, but sometimes the idea is so good it's okay if the result is a bit tardy and sloppy. I don't think Alexander understood that. He was constantly blaming people for forgetting their posture and poise, and that's a very dangerous thing to do, because once you're starting to put blame on people, they will no longer develop. Fear is installed in the system. And this was actually even the prevalent method when, what's her name? I think her name is Irene Tasker, one of those most well-known students of Alexander. Yes, she was an American, and she traveled to from the United States to England just to meet Alexander. She saw him once in New York, I think, and she got so fascinated by him, so she decided by her own idea, her own making, to meet with Frederick Matthias Alexander in London and convince him to teach her. And she became thereby the first student of Alexander to be a teacher. I think her name was Irene Tasker. And she said at that time, Frederick Matthias Alexander and his brother A.R., they took turns in screaming at the student and blaming the student. And despite that fact, she actually learned. But that is an exception, of course. It is not something that usually happens. I would talk about time, and that time, just as space, cannot be made up preemptively a priori of moments and no moments. Time cannot neither be made up of a priori be made up of absence and presence, something which is part and parcel with the problem of metaphysics of presence. Afterwards, yes, definitely we can have past and future and such things, but it cannot be made up before time enters the situation. Before time is, it cannot be preemptively a priori divided in past, present and future. It's a little bit like let time come to you. Don't decide preemptively what time is. If you don't let time be what it is, you can't learn from time. And that means you can't learn how time is, and you won't learn other things as well. And this is something that Henri Bergson tries to point out with his retention and pretension. But some of those parts are very hard to understand from the writing of Henri Bergson only. I needed the information coming from Susie Froebel, fractality, a repetition of Mandelbrot. He wrote quite a lot, and also another look at James Gleick. I even had the time to look into the protagonist in, or the actor in Jurassic Park. The preemptive take on time decides what it is beforehand, and then you stick to that. And then of some reason you say you have time, you understand time. So it's a double problem. First, you do this thing unknowingly, because there is no information about that. It has never been hypothesized. It has always been the case. It's a part of reality. And therein lies the ontic take. The second one is you still claim you have time. And the second one is the interesting problem I've been thinking about for decades. How can you claim that you still have time when obviously you cannot? And I had a gut feeling you cannot, but I didn't have any good arguments for it. And therefore I didn't believe myself to a certain extent, which is a sort of interesting, but beside the point. Time is very similar, and this understanding was given to me from Stephen Wolfram. And he shows that we don't need existence. Actually, existence can be a hindrance in doing mathematics, topology, chaos theory, and so forth. After you start with your calculations, you can have existence to a greater degree. But if you start out with existence, you would actually lose the clarity in existence. You will most definitely hinder yourself in your understanding of space. And I'd say the same goes for time. If we start with a division already before the fact, so I don't say past and future is not in time. Could very well be. But if you start out with that, you will make a division beforehand. And that Kantian move, as I would say it is, will block out understanding of time in just the same way as having a preemptive take on space will block out space. You will be trying to force something upon space. That forced action will result in bad predictions, bad understanding, and blocking out some parts randomly while leaving some other parts there to be understood. But it's this random take that is the most problematic. If it wasn't random and we blocked up, like, let's say 75%, that 25% can still be used because we know that percentage and where the blocking out is going to happen. We know those two factors for some mad reason. Then we wouldn't be as screwed as we are today, because the division is unclear, it's unconscious, it's unmentioned, it's unhypothesized, it's not verbal, although it can be verbalized. And this is what I've been trying to do. And once you see the full hypothesis, you can discard it, and that's a very good start. And that's actually making a hypothesis of it after the fact. And I like the picture that you force a mold, alltså en form på svenska. A mold on reality that is still not decided. And it's a bias. It's a constrictedness. It's a position in your body that is uncalled for. And you become accustomed to that position. This is how things are. This is reality. The sheer repetition of it, that is what makes reality be reality. It puts a strain on experience, forcing this pre-made model on every instant of time. It takes your energy. They are, so to speak, the N2 neurons, the flight and fight, because it has an ingredients of fear. Because you know your system doesn't know sufficiently to be balanced anymore, because you don't have access enough to time. That is a problem. And now you might see where I'm heading in this lecture. But let's put some more in. If you have a conformed mold, you will not build a hermeneutical horizon. You will not do the fractality. This is the reason Henri Bergson made 2 neologisms, and that there is a force to the whole thing, élan vital, a direction. And that direction is immensely important to understand why it's there and how it works. And those are understanding points. That understanding cannot come if you have a ready-made mold that doesn't have much of a knowledge to it. It's just a simple division without complexities. It's not coming from the world. It's forced on the world. One could say that we force an extra time on the time that already is, but the times are different. That extra time is actually the same time that sort of Julian Barber dissolves in the end of time. And I will be getting to Julian Barber later here, but it could be good to understand that in quantum mechanics, time and space are left out of the equation. For a very good reason. If they were to be in the Wheeler-de Wit equation, they will give the wrong results to the equation. They shouldn't be there. This extra take on time, it's a way of explaining it. Instead of a fractality that when everything already is in the world, time has always already been in the world. It's not an extra feature on the world, coming before and being outside of the world. I think I can't put it better. Coming before and being outside of the world. Time being physically outside of the world, like spatially outside of the world, but also temporally before itself, before time. That's in a nutshell my point. We put an a priori straitjacket on time that makes truer understanding of time impossible. And we are forgetting the why. There is no why anymore. We are passively just taking, and let me call it Newtonian time for simplification, but you know it has an older heritage than that, which is obvious. But well, let's call it Newtonian time. Newtonian time still Newtonian space as well, still has a sort of a why. It's used in a very restricted and little domain of reality, in constructing bridges and moon rockets. But there is a why there to the Newtonian physics. The why is, why should I use Newtonian physics? Well, I want to build a moon rocket. There is no why in putting the division on time outside of time, outside the world, and before time. There's no why there. You could still do it if you have a why, but not putting the question why, not having a direction, that is one of the main problems. And the reason for we started with Julian Barber was just that. It might be that we had an understanding that we should use Newtonian time. We didn't have any option 3-4 years ago, and we discovered Julian Barber could sort of get rid of this obstacle to understanding. Oddly enough, and this is not a more important point, this is a minor point, but oddly enough, some of the problems with Newtonian time and space actually turns up to a certain degree in ourselves. The free body problem is a major problem, but it sort of turns up in our non-understanding of time. We can't understand relationships. And if you say free body problem could never apply to you yourself, of course it could. Free thinking modes, free thinking objects, free objects in the world, free things you want to do, and there you go. But that's a minor point. The more problematic point is when you accept blindly Newtonian time, you do it without the why. The why is very important. You can still use Newtonian time, but you better ask before, why should I do it? What is the circumstance? And this is the point from Heidegger. This makes Heidegger indispensable. Without the understanding of Heidegger, we couldn't be at this level. We cannot simply lift ourselves out of time. It's impossible. We are in time. And understanding, projecting time, is better in a stream of time, the Elan Vital of Bergson. This time that is before non-moments and moments. That is before the pause in music and the tone in music, or the space in writing, or the space in my talking and the non-space of my talking. What is before that, that is time. Could that be understood? It's coming a bit after the fact, slightly. We are making a sync problem, so to speak. We have this firmly established idea that we can somehow understand time and not be in time. Like time is not a feature within time, and that we don't act in time. A sort of otherworldly thinking that reveals that we somehow think time is not a feature of our own existence, that time, just like space, is situated somewhere else. In a way it sounds even eerie and not a little bit scary, but the understanding that the distance this creates is hard to fathom now when the problem is put on paper, so to speak, or a laptop, a tablet. How can you sort of think to yourself that you can be completely outside of time and still understand time. How is that even possible? And how can you not do time, so to speak, be in time to meetings, so forth, be effective in your time management or whatever it is, not be too slow, not be too fast, and so forth and so forth, and still have a good concept of time? It's hinting to a miserable Whoeverian world, some otherworldly, a world we don't live in. There is where true time is, and we can have that concept in our heart. When we go into ourselves, we can find that concept of time somehow. It's a scary assumption, and I remember one of the first recordings we made. I listened to it again, and it was this Annika or Angela, and said that she had her own time and there was a subjective time or an objective time out there somewhere, and those two were different somehow, and the outside time made her stressy, weary, fatigued, so she needed her own subjective time. And she assumed clearly that there was some time outside her own experience, that objective time was not part of her experience. It's like pointing very broadly with your whole hand without really pointing at all. There is the real time. If you imagine a hand without fingers, without direction, there is the proper time. And I have in myself a connection to that concept. And it's not the concept of the real world, of interactions and doings, being in time, arranging time, making time to have dinner, go for a swim, cut the yard, which is due time here in this yard. That time is completely different from the real time in the cave of Plato. But we all do that assumption, I would say. Just gonna grab some coffee here. We do all pat ourselves on the shoulders and say we do have access to time, but it's too bad I don't have enough of it and I don't know how to manage my time and so forth. Could it be that we don't actually know what time is? And time can, as Bergson hinted to, have its own knowledge, things that we can understand, and some of that knowledge can even, lo and behold, could even be verbalized. Yes, could be laws in the world, could be strict things that we can fathom, understand, remember and use. This is not the time of Newton. Time of Newton is out there somewhere else in another galaxy, and that time can't give us any knowledge and tell us how to arrange our mornings, or can't help us with doing our car things, and it can't develop through history either. Geschichte, I would say, as the Heidegger term. Can be no development. And now we start understanding that it's a rather nasty place to be situated. A preemptive division between one's own time and a sort of an objective time that will absolutely stop all understanding of time. Very hard to go anyway from that stance. A bit like saying, I'm gonna learn the game of football by looking at TV. Could learn some of it, but you do actually have to play it to sort of internalize it. If you don't get any explanations, no explanation, just look at TV, try to fathom a game without the sound on the TV. This is worse, I would say. Here, you don't even look at the TV. You just hear some footballers kicking the ball. Could happen. but the information you get is light, random, but you do get some information, that is true. Otherwise the project would have been given up. But that, listen carefully, would not have meant that the problem was solved. No, of course that would be even worse. Do remember that. Time is in a way not to be played with. This is a nasty place. Not having access to one's own time. And of course the stress of Annika comes from that. Disorientation in time, not knowing time. How can you not be horrified? Scared. What is stress? It's being scared. It's nothing else. In the same way, if you don't know where you are in space, that's a scary thing. It's also a scary thing not to know where you are in time. You can't plan your time, you can't make up time, you can't control the direction of time, you can't do anything. It just happens and your thinking is just going on because you let the responsibility be somewhere outside yourself. Because of our tradition. We never decided that either. It's a little bit the scary feeling of looking at one's own life and not be able to do anything about it. Nothing. And this is actually something that has been recognized to be a very common fact today. Even among young children, they feel alienated or alienated. They don't feel that they are themselves. They feel estranged from themselves. I think I had that feeling only once in school. This is very common today. And it's a horrible, horrible feeling. And of course, that causes stress. That is stress, not understanding time. It's like walking around in a landscape where everything is completely dark and the sounds are not coming from a particular point of view, coming from everywhere. You are sort of enmeshed in a complete noise. Or those people who walk into those places where every noise gets sucked up. There are those completely silent rooms and they make you feel nausea in the end. Did Annika sometime in her life decide or not decide, but still made the decision to live in the figment of her own imagination? That she could somehow understand time without using time, going into time, as she still had the concept. How would that work practically? Like learning to drive without a car. And it would also mean that preemptive take that we all do, of course not only Annika, but that time consists of past, future and present. And of course present is the best place to stay in. It's a pre-made model. And you have to force the world to follow this pre-made model. And it's random. And this randomness, this is how we recognize time somehow. Just because it's random. That never, ever, any of our plans, our predictions are correct or satisfying. Satisfaction is left out of the picture. It's not part of reality. Our human instantiation is not part of the project. It's pretty horrible. I would say that there's no horror movie that could be that horrifying. and completely unnecessary as well. Of course, the why question is not there. We've been tricking ourselves into forgetting the why question. The amnesia is here once more. And it is there when we go into construct a bridge using the Newtonian classical physics. How odd we don't remember that. And there all of a sudden we speak about ourselves and all other time. That we say that time is outside ourselves and doesn't have a purpose anymore. No trajectory, bar those trajectory that are made on a piece of paper or computed in a computer. Those are the only trajectory, but your own life can't have a trajectory that you actually live in and directs everything. Because if you don't have a direction in your body, there is no trajectory in your time, and you simply don't know time. Now we're getting closer to this almond in the porridge, but not yet. There is an absolute horrendous strain we put on our system, our bodies, every time we sort of enforce this solid, fixed model of time. It takes away all the energy, and it also rids everything of purpose, directionality, awareness. There cannot be any awareness, because awareness itself is directed. And it should be situated in time, not outside of time. And that makes consciousness be very, very far away. And no wonder we can't reach into our own behind, that massive corridor of knowledge, understanding. We don't remember anymore. And that is for a very good reason, because we are becoming enemy with time. Everything to do with time is bad. There's nothing nice to bring us. No understanding, no nothing. Because there is no understanding, as Nietzsche said in Gay Science. Well, it's not true. There is understanding. And this is what time actually is building up once we understand it. And as Julian Barber showed, that even within the system that usually has a why, the Newtonian classical physics, there is a lack in predictive power. And that could be healed by taking away time and space. And then it's gone, the problem. Excellent job by Julian Barber. He is the Grand Nestor. And this is how it started. He can't be discarded. What we learn from his is still in the bottom, is in the corridor that we have behind us. But what is bad at some instant in classical physics is an absolute disaster for our own lives, and for society, and for the future of the humankind. And our very perception of time has diminished. We are becoming more and more blunt. And there is a perceptuary organ, almost, as Susie Froebel points out. And that has been diminished more and more. So we don't know time as we used to do, and we can't direct it anymore. And although this habit's been going on for millennia, we won't give it up. And the reason for that is the obvious. We still do think we have access to time somehow. And there lies in the problem. That's the stopping point. That could be the ego. You stretch yourself and say, yes, I do know time. It's out there in some other world, and my inside can tell me what time is. I have my own private conception of time, not to be shared by anyone, not created in interaction with the world. There is this fling for unmade, non-existent things in Western tradition. Just like Brouwer pointed out, the mathematical figures do exist somewhere, for most mathematicians, and this was in the 30s, in some otherworldly place, which Brouwer showed to be completely ludicrous. Later, Bishop in the 50s and the 60s sharpened the argument and said this is schizophrenia, to have a doubled world, a twisted, divided world, and having these objects existing somewhere else. And I'm amazed sometimes, I try to explain this, how weird this really is, and some people don't even understand it. What's so weird with that? Things that never been made still exist. Well, it defies everything we know about reality. And not having a clear-cut line there, this is not reality. It's in itself really, really scary. Bad for thinking. And that's the reason Brouwer wanted to take away the Platonic idea within mathematics, because it's bad for thinking. And I've seen arguments in the net, and they say, I don't think there will be much more progress in mathematics if we take away the Platonic idea and the law of the excluded middle. A lot of people are arguing that way. I think we'll gain some, but it's rather beside the point. It's really bad to have bad thinking. That's it. Can never be a good thing. You can't say that the result still coming in this abstract world of mathematics. You hurt your own thinking. Bound to happen something bad in the end. It's like cutting off your legs, but just because you're supposed to sit for a whole week. You will have to use them sometime. Don't undermine your own thinking. That's pretty obvious, I think. And it doesn't really make sense that mathematics could be as good as real mathematics, or constructed objects by human mind and hand. It can never be that. Mathematics is made by humans, not some otherworldly thing. And just to mention objects that never been made and say they exist, that's pretty bad. That's putting the foot to the entrance to the balmy bin. You had a point there, Bishop. Of course, you should not use so strong argument as to call people schizophrenic. I think we're all schizophrenic in the modern world. I would avoid that sharp argument. Doesn't help. It's not helpful. But now I'm getting to the chase finally. I think there is a big ego there. I think that was the big ego that led the mathematicians astray, to sort of abandon their own thinking, be willing to do that. And we know today, and this is an interesting thing coming from Ian McGilchrist, the very best mathematicians, they do actually away with the law of the excluded middle. That's been tested. I think that these people are so smart that they always see the law of excluded middle as more like a rule than a law. Something that could be applied, or a way of explaining to others and the person himself to make a verbal explanation. That is the law of the excluded middle. But they were thinking much bigger, and that's an absolute necessity to go greater into mathematics. Most of the very best of the mathematicians today are actually doing the math in the right hemisphere. The left hemisphere is we do with the law with the excluded middle. And that's more because that's the verbal brain, has to do with communication. That's how we communicate these things. So those mathematicians can do all the math in the right brain, and then they communicate with the law of the excluded middle. This is my understanding of the whole thing. So they won't even be aware that they're not using the law of the excluded middle. It simply doesn't exist in the right hemisphere. It's a holistic hemisphere. I mentioned many times, and this is about, once more, JR, JR is not a figure in Dallas only, it's also the Japanese railroad system. Absolutely in time. This is time. That's it. If you understand time, you can do time. And then things come in time. Time is of reality. Are your trains not coming in time, neither are you understanding the concept of time. Never, ever can that happen. Because there is a reality. Math is made by humans, and so is time. We do time. It's absolutely ludicrous to say that you know time when the trains are not coming in time. And we lost knowledge of time the last couple of decades because today things are not running in time as they used to. And the reason for that is that we are now trusting higher systems, so to speak, in society, automatic system to do the time. And that works in some cases, but it doesn't work with the railroad system. It's too many trains to take care of. It's soon the calculations goes into infinity. And what they do with JR is each and everyone working within JR has a concept of time that is a working concept that they do with and that they learned, and that there are, this is scary, there are even verbal clues onto how time works. Do things in a specific order. I won't translate the whole thing, but there are some clues that people in Japan found out, and that those could actually be completely copied. So we could learn from them if we were willing to give up a part of this big ego that says we know time. We can just copy it right over, carefully in every minute detail, and our trains will go in time. Plus, in the process, we will also learn to understand time more, because there's no limit to it. You learn from time, you find the rules, you find the peculiarities, the properties of time. And this is one of the main arguments against Newton, coming from mainly Leibniz and Huygens, that the Newtonian time doesn't have any properties. It actually takes away all properties. And I think in modern time, if you say time has properties, that would be like, if they even would understand what you say, that would be explained in quite a different way, indirectly. Very close to the same way Hopi Indians are using objects and subject. They're not. Their system, I would say, is better. And when we look at their system, we infer objects and subject. Chomsky does that. And thereby destroying the whole Hopi language, or the main idea of it. I think we do what clues we have of time, and they are preserved in our traditions, in our knowledge. It could be, for instance, take a shower and then you shave, or be tidy in your bedroom in order to time my flight better. Those things are advice coming from the past. There are much more of those advice in Japan, for instance. Hundreds of them. And some, I'm sad to say, are not even verbal. They are bodily. But remember this one, there is a timing to our own bodies. Japanese are following it, at least they were until recently, and that is the timing of the very body you have yourself. Spine first. That's a feature of time. And it gets less confusing to say that's a feature of time and saying that's a feature of your body, because it's a movement. Movement is time. Time is sort of the mother of all movement. The spine should come first, otherwise you're completely out of sync. And there you are, you're like me, I don't know time either, to be honest. I don't lengthen my back. And if I try to do that, you could do it in the Alexandroid way, like this. And you do it after the fact. This would help If you understand time, it will be so much easier to understand the great insight of Frederick Matthias Alexander, because you will understand it's time itself. And if you get into time, you don't look at your whole body system as something exterior to reality, or that you have a body. You are a body. And that's a big difference. All of a sudden, a lot of that distance disappear and you get closer. And then you realize every single thought is helped by balancing up. You get clarity. And then slowly you are abandoning representationalism within your thinking. The very idea that your thoughts are representing something in the outer reality need to be checked. And that's a scary thing. Not as scary as the thing that Annika or Angela mentioned. It's a scary thing, but that scare is disappearing. One question that may pop up: how can if I don't believe in representationalism, or I don't use that, how can I in that case explain the word to myself and others, especially yourself, I would say. But you realize that there is something even more real than the descriptions, and that's a process to understand that, and that in that you feel a lot more safe. But of course, when we are still in the left brain, all we have is chance, so to speak. When we are in our regular system, all of you have chance, and then we shouldn't press ourselves to bigger understanding, because that will come. As long as you train, it will come to you. It's a training of body and mind to be in time, as you will clearly see now. And no one should state they know time if they're not themselves in time. Concept is a living thing. It gets its force from its use. It's a little bit like saying, I can manufacture cars, but none of my cars are working. They don't even have tires. They look more like stones. This is this level of stupidity in the West, to say that we have time, but we don't do time. You cannot fix time. Then you don't have time. That's it. Don't beat yourself up about this, but it's very, very helpful, because true time is so much better than to having to live with an image of time or a copy of time. It's like having a photograph of some delicious food in your pocket and you take it out when you're hungry. It's just horrid. It's just the ego, this construct that doesn't even have awareness, that will hinder the process. And the ego always claims that I still know time. Well, I use it in my descriptions, the ego will say. I always put it in. And of course the ego is, my ego was also completely resistant to the Wheeler-DeWitt equation. When I saw it, I instantly put time and space into the equation anyway. Said to myself, it's in space, and that space it's in, it is not of this world. This is actually what I thought many years ago when I saw it the first time. And this is of course the Wittgensteinian private language argument. Yes, of course, but now expanded and clearer, I hope to you, that words and even those things like time is something we use, and reality is something utterly real in that sense. And to say you have something but you can't use it, that doesn't even make sense to yourself. That's a horrible situation for yourself, and it will not go unnoticed, even though most people or situations won't be conscious of it. But something in yourself will be conscious about you don't have time. That's the reason for the metaphysics of presence, this lack we feel. And although metaphysics of presence in itself, it's not so much part of the problem as sort of a solution that you need to have to feel safe, to feel happy, or have some hope. that hope could be binding in the end. But I suggest you slowly give up the idea of the metaphysics of presence. Don't try to cut it off with a knife, because you need this hopefulness of one upon a time be completely present. You will be, in a way, but to a much greater extent than you ever can imagine. You can't even imagine what it is to be in time. That's just beyond everyone. It's just so fantastic. And getting knowledge from time will help your life immensely. All those happenings in Japanese, in Chinese, in Korean, they help the people there. They make them sturdy, make them be able to work those mad hours that would break anyone on the planet. There's no others. I was just amazed when I saw Japanese in the metro, sleeping, looking completely distressed in that city. For me, just looking at map on over Tokyo make me stressed. It's way too much people, and they are everywhere, and there are no park benches to sit on. There's no parks even. And people were relaxed there. They had access to time. In reality, the body only relaxes when it knows it has time. That's why we need to go on vacation and leave the work at home. They don't have that because they have more access to time. For us, the only reason is to leave everything that associates with our lack of knowledge of time. For them, it's not that. Wouldn't it be great when you went on vacation, you didn't only go on vacation to relax, you went on vacation to discover something new, and you're already relaxed when you get there. This is how I remember my first vacation. I was already relaxed. And there I can enjoy it even more. Becomes a habit. Go away to relax. Why don't be relaxed now, here, in this now? Detensed, aware. There can be no loss whatsoever to be in time. Only an immense gain. And I think one of the reasons us shoving away time is just too much for us. It's too much great of a knowledge. And we're afraid of the disappointment that will be when we think about our previous life. And I think that is a passing thing. That will happen only for a short while. Once you understand that time is the greatest gift you can have, the gratitude and the understanding will sort of absolve you from the problem of guilt or angst or whatever you can have. That would absolve you because it's such a great gift. Yeah, that was it. Really happy to get that off my chest. I say thank you very much, and I wish you a very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye for now.